A Marine stood alone on the windswept coast of Oregon, his uniform traded for worn jeans, his eyes hollow with loss. At his feet, 3 German Shepherd pups huddled close, shivering, too young to understand why their world had crumbled. He had buried his wife weeks before, and now the last door of family had slammed shut behind him. No one expected him to rise again. No one believed those pups would matter. But in their eyes, he found a reason to keep breathing, and in a forgotten envelope hidden deep in an old army coat, he found a secret worth $7 million. What happened next will make you cry, and remind you that even broken hearts can build hope again. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below, and if you believe that no soldier, no family, and no animal should ever be abandoned, hit subscribe, because this story might just restore your faith in miracles. The midsummer sun poured down over the small coastal town of Bay Ridge, Oregon, casting long beams that shimmered across the waves and bounced off the clapboard houses along the shore. The air was thick and heavy with salt from the sea, and gulls wheeled lazily above the docks, their cries cutting through the silence of noon. Bay Ridge was the kind of place where time moved slower, a place where weather-beaten fishing boats lined the harbor, and children played barefoot in dusty lanes. But on that day, the tranquility of the seaside town clashed with the storm inside one particular 2-story house, painted cream with dark green shutters. Inside stood Logan Hayes, 33 years old, a U.S. Marine sergeant recently discharged after years of service. He had the tall, broad-shouldered build of a man who had spent much of his life under heavy packs and long marches, though his frame was leaner now from months of irregular meals and restless nights. His dark brown hair, cropped short in a military cut, had grown uneven at the edges, and faint stubble shadowed his square jaw. His eyes were a striking shade of hazel, intense yet weary. The eyes of someone who had seen too much but spoke little of it. A faint scar arched above his left eyebrow, a reminder of shrapnel during his last deployment. And though his posture remained disciplined, a subtle limp sometimes betrayed the lingering pain in his right leg. Beneath his rugged exterior, Logan carried a quiet gentleness, particularly with children and animals, a tenderness sharpened by grief. His wife, Emily, had passed away from a sudden illness less than a year ago, and with her gone, he bore the heavy task of raising the last gift she had left him: 3 German Shepherd puppies. The 3 pups were small bundles of restless energy, only 4 months old, each already showing their distinct personalities. Max, the largest, with a sable coat darkening toward his back and intelligent amber eyes, was sharp and quick to respond, always the first to bark when strangers approached, protective beyond his tender age. Luna, smaller and softer in build, had a lighter tan coat with gentle black markings around her ears. She was calm, affectionate, and inclined to press her head against Logan's knee when he seemed troubled. Rex, the runt of the litter, but perhaps the most spirited, had a rich black saddle across his back, and mischievous brown eyes, always chewing at shoelaces or chasing after anything that rolled, making even the bleakest moments feel a little lighter. To Logan, they weren't just dogs, they were family, living reminders of Emily's love. But not everyone saw them that way. Standing in the living room with sharp disapproval etched across her lined face was Elaine Carter, Logan's mother-in-law. Elaine was a tall, narrow woman in her early 60s, with high cheekbones and a permanent tightness to her mouth, as if smiling required too much effort. Once elegant in posture, the years had hardened her. She dressed in pressed skirts and silk blouses that seemed too formal for the sleepy town, her silver-streaked hair swept into a bun with precise care. Elaine had been raised in a strict household where appearances mattered more than emotions. The early death of her own father, and the pressure to manage her family's small store at a young age, had carved into her a belief that survival demanded rigidity. That sternness showed in every clipped word she used toward Logan. Beside her stood Richard Carter, her husband, a man of stockier build, shorter than Logan but this broad in the shoulders, his once ruddy complexion now dulled with age and frustration. Richard had been a small business owner, running a supply shop downtown for years, and prided himself on being self-sufficient. His face, with its ruddy cheeks and heavy brows, often turned crimson when angered, which was more frequent of late. Though not inherently cruel, he carried a sense of entitlement and pride that made him intolerant of what he perceived as weakness. You and those animals are a burden we can no longer carry. Elaine's voice sliced through the air, shrill and resolute, echoing against the plaster walls. She stood rigidly with her arms crossed, her gaze drilling into Logan. Richard shifted beside her, his jaw set. Logan remained at the edge of the kitchen, his hand gripping the handle of his old duffel bag, knuckles turning pale. He had faced combat zones and watched friends fall beside him, but this rejection within the supposed safety of family cut deeper. He wanted to argue, to unleash the frustration boiling in his chest. But behind him, 3 small shapes huddled together. Max's ears were pricked and alert. Luna pressed low to the ground, trembling. Rex let out a small whine. "They're not just animals," Logan said, voice steady though low. "They're what's left of Emily. They're her gift to me." Elaine's lips pressed thin, unmoved. "You need to face reality, Logan. You can barely provide for yourself. We are not obliged to raise strays and watch over you forever." Richard, perhaps to reinforce his wife's words, took a step forward, his cheeks flushed. "Pack your things, son. It's time." Logan inhaled slowly, a soldier's practiced discipline keeping his voice level. He knew pleading would change nothing. He bent to scoop up Rex, who wriggled restlessly, and motioned for Max and Luna to follow. He walked into the small spare room where they had been staying. The air smelled faintly of detergent and dust. He packed methodically. 2 changes of clothes, Emily's old sweater folded carefully, and the puppy's worn toys. The room fell silent except for the shuffle of items into bags. He didn't look back at Richard or Elaine. Within minutes, Logan stood on the front porch. The July sun glared mercilessly, reflecting off the asphalt and making the small town's narrow street shimmer. Sweat trickled down his brow as Max panted at his side, Luna pressed close to his ankle, and Rex clawed at his bootlaces. Logan held the duffel in one hand, the leash of Max in the other, while the other 2 pups clung at his feet. Behind him, Elaine and Richard lingered at the doorway, their silhouettes stiff, offering no farewell. The world seemed too quiet until a voice rang from across the street. Clara Jennings, the neighbor, had just rolled open the wooden door of her garage. She was in her mid-50s, tall and slender, her frame carrying the graceful fatigue of someone who worked long hours but never forgot kindness. Clara wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, her chestnut hair streaked with gray tied loosely at her nape. Her face, lined yet warm, reflected years of both hardship and compassion. She had once lost her own husband in a boating accident off the Bay Ridge coast, a tragedy that had stripped her of bitterness and left behind only resilience and empathy. Ever since, Clara had become the quiet helper of the neighborhood, always ready to offer bread, a listening ear, or a place to stay. "Logan?" she called, concern knitting her brow, as she noticed the bags and the pups. "What's going on?" Logan adjusted the strap on his shoulder. "We have to leave," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Clara's eyes softened as they fell upon the puppies. Max with his steady gaze, Luna trembling, Rex nosing at Logan's boot. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, her voice firm but gentle. "A storm's coming in. Bring them over to my place. You can't be out in this heat with the little ones." For a moment, Logan hesitated. Pride had kept him from asking for help, but the sight of Clara's open expression and the anxious eyes of the puppies broke through his resistance. He gave a small nod. The sound of suitcase wheels rattled along the sidewalk as Logan crossed the street, the hot wind sweeping past, carrying with it the unanswered ache of rejection. Behind him, Elaine and Richard watched silently from their doorway, unmoved, as the Marine they had once called family walked away with only his children in fur and his memories of Emily. Clara held her door open wide, the faint scent of baking bread drifting out into the heavy air, and gestured them inside. For Logan and the 3 pups, it was not yet home, but it was shelter, and perhaps the first glimmer of something more. Clara Jennings' home stood just across the narrow street, a modest single-story bungalow painted a faded robin's egg blue, with a front porch sagging slightly from years of salt air and storms rolling in off the Pacific. Inside, the air smelled faintly of rising bread and wood polish, a comforting scent that wrapped around Logan Hayes the moment he stepped through the door with the 3 German Shepherd pups trotting at his feet. Clara closed the door behind them, her movements brisk but not rushed, as though she had long practiced the rhythm of providing comfort without making a fuss about it. She was in her mid-50s, tall and slim, her long frame carried with an easy grace, despite the weariness in her eyes. Her chestnut hair, tied loosely at the nape, framed a face lined more from years of loss than age. Since the accident at sea that had claimed her husband 15 years before, Clara had quietly become the neighborhood's unspoken anchor. Never the loudest, but always the first to step forward when someone was in need. Logan set his duffel down near the entryway, the weight of it heavy not just with fabric and belongings, but with years of memories compressed into one faded military bag. Max padded forward immediately, sniffing the baseboards as though assessing this new outpost. Luna hesitated, her tail low, pressing close to Logan's leg for reassurance. Rex scrambled clumsily onto the braided rug in the living room and began gnawing on its frayed edge until Logan clicked his tongue and pulled him back gently. The pups, though restless, mirrored the state of their master, uncertain, displaced, but clinging to the hope of safety. "You can lay your things here," Clara said softly, already moving toward the kitchen. Her voice carried a steadiness honed by years of keeping others calm, even when her own storms raged inside. She glanced at the puppies, a small smile flickering despite her tired eyes. "They'll like the rug better than the hard floor, but I'll fetch some blankets." Logan spread a worn blanket across the polished wooden floor near the fireplace, laying himself down without complaint. The pups instantly clustered against him, Max draping across his chest like a watchful sentry, Luna curling at his hip, and Rex sprawling half on his boots. Logan stroked their heads absent-mindedly, his eyes fixed on the ceiling beams above. Clara busied herself at the stove, clattering pots and slicing vegetables, the sounds of ordinary domestic life filling the silence that weighed between them. Over dinner, a simple spread of chicken broth and bread fresh from the oven, Clara sat opposite Logan, her elbows lightly resting on the table. She watched him carefully, noting the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his fork paused often before he lifted it. He was a man trained for discipline, but grief had etched new lines on his face. "You don't have to say much if you don't want to," Clara began gently, breaking a piece of bread. "But I know the look of someone carrying more than they can hold." Logan glanced down at his plate, then back at the pups lying at his feet. Max already asleep, Rex chewing a corner of the blanket, Luna gazing up at him as though reading his sorrow. Finally he spoke, his voice low but steady. "I get a disability check. Small, barely enough. I've tried finding work, but with this leg and with the kids here, it's not easy." He gestured toward the pups, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth before fading. "They think I can't manage, that I'm just another mouth to feed." Clara leaned back, her face thoughtful, her eyes carrying a softness that only years of loss could carve. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "what looks like the end of a road is only the beginning of another. Sometimes God closes one door so he can open another, though we never know what's waiting when we step through." Logan listened, unsure whether to believe. Faith had always been Emily's strength more than his own, but Clara's words carried weight not of preaching, but of lived truth. She was not promising miracles, just the possibility of new beginnings. The pups stirred restlessly, and Logan excused himself, pulling his duffel closer. He crouched by it on the floor, his fingers brushing across the fabric worn thin from years of use. He pulled out a few items, folded clothes, an old pair of boots, Emily's sweater faint with her scent, and then reached deeper. His hand paused when it touched something stiff tucked inside a pocket of Emily's jacket. Carefully, he drew out a cream-colored envelope, sealed and slightly yellowed with time. His breath caught as he turned it over. No return address, only the faint indent of handwriting across the flap. He had not seen it before. Perhaps Emily had tucked it away, forgotten in the months of her illness, or perhaps she had intended for him to find it later. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and unfolded the papers inside. It was a letter, handwritten in a slightly messy scrawl, that immediately struck him with recognition. His chest tightened, his heart thudding painfully. The handwriting belonged to Ryan Cooper, a fellow Marine and close comrade who had died in Afghanistan 2 years ago. Ryan had been wiry, quick-witted, with dark blonde hair kept in a high and tight cut, and gray-blue eyes that never lost their humor even under fire. He had been the kind of soldier others naturally trusted, a man who cracked jokes in the bleakest moments, yet never wavered when lives were on the line. Ryan had saved Logan once, shoving him aside in the split second before a blast that ended Ryan's life. Logan had carried the weight of that debt ever since. He read slowly, each word heavy. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. Don't be sad. My family is grateful to you. They've set up a trust fund in your name, $7 million. Use it to rebuild your life. Do good with it. You deserve it." The room seemed to tilt as Logan's vision blurred. He pressed a hand to his mouth, the first tear since Emily's funeral sliding down his cheek, not from weakness, but from release. His hands shook as he lifted the other documents, legal papers, bank seals, confirming the unimaginable truth. $7 million. Not a lottery, not a prize, but a brother's final promise, a debt of honor. Clara appeared at the doorway, drawn by the silence. "Logan?" she asked softly, seeing the papers trembling in his hands. She stepped closer, the lines on her face deepening as she recognized the weight of whatever he held. She said nothing further, only laid a hand gently on his shoulder, steadying him as his world shifted beneath his feet. For Logan, the envelope was not just money. It was a mission handed down from the battlefield, a torch passed from the fallen to the living. He folded the letter carefully, pressing it back against his chest, and knew that nothing in Bay Ridge, or in his own life, would ever be the same again. Morning light spilled over Bay Ridge, Oregon, painting the clapboard houses in shades of gold and soft blue as gulls wheeled high above the harbor. Logan Hayes sat on the porch steps of Clara Jennings' bungalow, the 3 German Shepherd pups clustered around him. Max, the largest, stood alert, his amber eyes scanning the street with the air of a miniature sentinel. Luna pressed gently against Logan's side, her soft tan coat gleaming in the light, offering quiet comfort without a sound. Rex, restless and bold, tugged at the loose laces of Logan's boots, growling playfully as though the world held no darkness. The envelope from the night before sat tucked inside Logan's jacket, heavy as if it contained not paper, but the weight of his future. Logan knew he couldn't keep the secret to himself. If Ryan Cooper's letter was genuine, if the documents truly meant what they claimed, he had a responsibility, not just to himself, but to his fallen friend's memory. Clara, sensing his unease, had suggested a local attorney she trusted. And so, with the pups bundled into the back seat of his old truck, Logan drove across town, the sea breeze rattling through the cracked window. Bay Ridge's downtown was little more than 2 main streets that intersected near the courthouse. Shops with fading signs lined the sidewalks. A barber shop, a bakery, a tackle store for fishermen. Logan parked outside a small brick building with a brass plate by the door reading Collins and Tate, attorneys at law. He pushed the door open, and a soft chime announced his arrival. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The receptionist, a young woman with cropped red hair and glasses too large for her freckled face, looked up with a polite smile. "Good morning, sir. Do you have an appointment?" Logan nodded stiffly. "Logan Hayes. Clara Jennings called ahead for me. I'm here to see Mr. Collins." A few minutes later, the office door swung open and Harper Collins stepped out. In his mid-40s, Harper carried himself with quiet assurance. He was of medium height, with salt and pepper hair neatly combed back, and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. His suit was well-tailored but not flashy, in muted gray, with a tie slightly loosened at the collar. His expression bore the calm patience of someone accustomed to people arriving with heavy burdens. Harper had grown up in Bay Ridge, the son of a fisherman, but an accident on a boat in his teens had left his father permanently injured. Watching his father navigate the cold machinery of disability paperwork had pushed Harper toward law school. Since then, he had made it his mission to ensure that no veteran or laborer in his town was ever lost in legal labyrinths. "Mr. Hayes," Harper said warmly, extending his hand, "Clara spoke highly of you. Why don't you come in?" Logan followed him into a small but tidy office lined with shelves of law books and a single framed photograph of Harper shaking hands with a veteran outside the courthouse. The pups pressed in close to Logan's boots, Max sitting upright as though ready for orders, Luna easing onto the rug, Rex sniffing every corner until Logan snapped his fingers to bring him back. Harper's eyes flicked to the dogs, and a smile softened his face. "They seem like good company." "They're family," Logan replied simply, taking a seat. He pulled the envelope from his jacket and slid it across the desk. "I found this last night, It belonged to my wife's things. The letter inside, it's from Ryan Cooper. He didn't make it back." Harper studied the name, his brows lifting slightly. "I know of the Coopers, old family money, but they kept quiet about it. Let's see what you got." Logan watched as Harper carefully unfolded the documents. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, eyes scanning line after line. Minutes stretched long, filled only by the faint rustle of paper. Max let out a low bark once, sensing Logan's tension. Luna nosed at his hand until he absently scratched her ear. Rex tugged playfully at Harper's shoelace, earning a chuckle from the lawyer before Logan pulled the pup back to his lap. Finally, Harper set the papers down and folded his hands. "Mr. Hayes, these documents are legitimate. The Cooper family established a trust fund in your name. $7 million held in a secured account. Conditions are minimal. It was left at Ryan's request. There will be tax implications and some procedural work, but the money is yours." Logan sat in silence, the words echoing through him. He had expected skepticism, perhaps even disappointment, but instead he was faced with undeniable truth. $7 million, enough to change everything. Enough to silence the voices that called him a burden. Yet the thought of indulgence, of wasting it on comfort, felt alien to him. Harper leaned forward, his voice even. "You've served this country. You've carried more than your share. This is not charity. It's a debt repaid. The question now is what you want to do with it." Logan looked down at the pup sprawled across his boots. Max lifted his head, amber eyes sharp. Luna pressed close, her gentle gaze unwavering. Rex rolled onto his back, paws flailing, breaking the tension with a growl that sounded more like a laugh. Logan smiled faintly. Later that afternoon, back at Clara's bungalow, Logan sat on the floor near the window, the pups curled around him. He spoke to them as though they understood. "Max, you'd guard this house with your life. Luna, you'd comfort anyone who hurt. Rex, you'd find a way to make even the darkest days lighter. Maybe that's what I'm meant to do too." He ran a hand over their soft heads, his voice firming. "Ryan didn't give me this so I could sit in comfort. He gave it to me so I could do good." The pups responded in their own ways. Max barked once, sharp and decisive, as though affirming the decision. Luna pressed her nose to Logan's palm, eyes soft and patient. Rex bounded up with a squeal, grabbing at Logan's sleeve as if to say, "Hurry up, let's start already." Logan exhaled, resolve tightening in his chest. He stood and pulled a notebook from his duffel, writing the words at the top of the page. Pause of Hope. The name had come to him suddenly, as natural as breathing. A foundation not for himself, but for others. For veterans who returned with scars unseen, and for dogs abandoned like his pups might have been. He didn't know yet how he would build it, but he knew this. It would begin here, in Bay Ridge, small and quiet, just as Ryan would have wanted. And for the first time in years, Logan felt not the weight of grief, but the spark of purpose. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Bay Ridge, gilding the horizon where the Pacific met the sky. The air smelled faintly of salt and pine, for though Bay Ridge was a seaside town, stands of evergreens still clustered behind the coastal bluff. Logan Hayes drove slowly along a gravel lane, the sound of his old truck crunching over loose stones. In the back seat, 3 German Shepherd pups pressed noses to the open window. Max with an alert, watchful gaze. Luna with her calm brown eyes half-lidded in contentment, and Rex wriggling wildly to catch every shifting scent. Ahead stood a small wooden house, its clapboard siding painted a weathered gray-blue that blended easily with the sea air. The roof slanted gently, and a modest porch stretched across the front, its railing lined with climbing ivy gone wild. To most, it was a humble house, unremarkable, but to Logan, it looked like the promise of stability. He parked in the drive and stepped out, the pups tumbling eagerly after him. The house had been vacant for a year, left behind when its elderly owner moved inland to live with family. The front yard was overgrown, weeds curling around an old bird bath, but beneath the neglect lay possibility. Logan walked the perimeter, hand brushing the weathered siding. He could almost hear Emily's voice teasing him about taking on another project. His chest ached, but he drew in the sea breeze, steadying himself. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The floorboards creaked but held firm beneath his boots. The living room had a wide window looking over the backyard, where a maple tree spread branches like an old guardian. Max leapt onto the rug and sat upright, surveying the room as if it were his new command post. Luna patted quietly, nosing the baseboards, pausing to nuzzle Logan's leg as though reassuring him. Rex, irrepressible as always, launched himself at a stack of forgotten newspapers and sent them scattering. The house had 3 small bedrooms, each barely larger than a closet. But Logan saw them not as limitations, but as gifts. He assigned one room to each pup in his mind, though he knew they would all end up sleeping by his side most nights. Still, he wanted them to have their own spaces. He found a corner near the window for Luna, laying down a warm blanket so she could rest in the sun. For Max, he attached a length of sturdy rope outside, beginning his early training for obedience. Sit, stay, alert. Rex got a collection of rubber toys that Logan had picked up at the feed store, bright red bones and squeaking balls that already bore the marks of small, sharp teeth. As the day slid into evening, Logan unpacked his few belongings. He set Emily's sweater folded neatly in the top drawer of his dresser, a quiet ritual of remembrance. In the kitchen, he put together a simple meal, fried eggs and toast, a pot of coffee. The pups circled beneath the table, their tails wagging in rhythm, waiting for scraps. Logan laughed, the sound rusty but real, as he broke off small pieces of toast for them. The next morning began a new routine. Logan rose at dawn, the pups tumbling over each other in excitement. He led them into the yard, where the grass was still damp with dew. Training began in earnest. Max responded quickly to sit and stay, his natural instinct to protect and obey already clear. Luna, slower but eager to please, would tilt her head at each command before finally easing into the correct position. Rex, as always, broke formation to chase a butterfly, earning an exasperated chuckle from Logan before being guided back. The sessions were clumsy, full of mistakes, but also laughter. Neighbors began to notice. Across the fence lived Martha Dunn, a widowed woman in her 70s with curly white hair and an ever-present sun hat. She leaned over the fence with a smile as she watched the pups wrestle in the grass. Martha was small in stature, but carried herself with spry energy. She had raised 4 children and now kept a thriving garden of roses and beans. She spoke with the ease of someone who enjoyed company, her days often quiet except for tending her plants. "They're handsome dogs," she remarked, her voice warm. "You've got your hands full, soldier." Logan nodded politely, and Max barked once as if in greeting. Martha chuckled and went back to her roses. But Logan could feel her presence as a reminder that this house was not isolated. It was part of a living neighborhood. That evening, while unpacking the last of his duffel, Logan stumbled upon something wedged between old field manuals and a coil of paracord. It was Emily's notebook, the leather cover scuffed from use. His breath caught as he opened it. Inside were grocery lists, sketches of flowers she had wanted to plant, and pages of recipes she never had the chance to try. Toward the back, her handwriting wavered, faint from her final months of illness. One line stood alone, written with careful determination. Turn the hurt into something good. Logan sat on the edge of the bed, the pups climbing onto his legs, Luna resting her head on his thigh. He read the line again and again until the letters blurred. Emily's voice seemed to whisper from the page, not of sorrow, but of guidance. The tears he had long held back slipped free, but with them came clarity. The money Ryan had left him wasn't just fortune. It was a chance, a tool. And Emily's words, preserved in ink, carved the direction, transformed grief into purpose. He closed the notebook, pressing it against his chest. "We'll build something, Em," he whispered. Max lifted his head, ears pricked at the tone of resolve. Luna nuzzled deeper against him, and Rex barked once as though seconding the vow. In that moment, in a small wooden house by the sea, Logan Hayes knew the path forward. The coastal air of Bay Ridge carried the scent of salt and cedar as winter thinned into spring. Logan Hayes awoke each morning to the crash of waves in the distance and the restless paws of 3 German shepherd pups scrambling across the wooden floor. Life inside the small blue-gray house was slowly settling into a rhythm, yet Logan's mind churned restlessly with Emily's words still etched in his heart. Turn the hurt into something good. The time had come to act. He returned to the office of Harper Collins, the attorney who had confirmed the trust left by Ryan Campbell's family. Harper, a man in his mid-40s with neat brown hair slicked back and a preference for perfectly pressed suits, had a presence that mixed warmth with formality. He was tall and slim, with steady gray eyes that carried both calculation and compassion. Harper had grown up in Bay Ridge, son of a fisherman, but had left for law school in Portland. After years of chasing big cases in the city, he returned when his father fell ill, deciding to dedicate himself to helping small-town clients. That sense of loyalty now drove him to guide Logan. Beside Harper sat Megan Price, the financial advisor Harper had recommended. Megan was in her early 30s, with a practical elegance, shoulder-length auburn hair tied back, a tailored navy jacket, and a notebook always in hand. She was sharp-eyed and direct, her speech measured but never cold. A childhood marked by her father's bankruptcy had instilled in her a deep desire to teach others how to avoid ruin and find stability. "You have $7 million, she told Logan, flipping open her notebook. "But what you do with it defines the story. Luxury or legacy. That's your choice." Logan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the pup sprawled at his feet. "Legacy," he said simply. Megan nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less. Harper smiled faintly. "Then let's get to work." Together they mapped the first steps of Paws of Hope. Logan's idea was to renovate abandoned houses in Bay Ridge and turn them into safe, affordable homes for struggling veteran families. The town had plenty of empty properties, remnants of economic downturns, their windows boarded and paint peeling. Harper handled the legal transfers, while Megan built a budget that balanced construction costs, volunteer stipends, and long-term maintenance. The work began with 3 houses on Birch Street, sagging structures that most residents had long given up on. Logan visited them on a gray morning, boots crunching on cracked sidewalks. The pups bounded across the yard, sniffing weeds and darting between rusted mailboxes. Max sat proudly on the porch of the first house, as though declaring it claimed. Luna padded gently into the yard, where 2 children of a veteran family played shyly, her calm presence easing their nervous giggles. Rex charged into a pile of dry leaves, exploding them into the air and drawing laughter from volunteers. Among the volunteers was Caleb Turner, a retired Navy mechanic in his 50s with a barrel chest and a sun-creased face. His hair was graying, his hands rough from years of tools and grease. Caleb had struggled after service, surviving on odd jobs, but he carried a resilient spirit. He swung a hammer with gusto, pausing only to ruffle Max's ears. "Never thought I'd be fixing a roof for myself," he joked, "but maybe building a future for others will do." Another was Elena Rodriguez, a young single mother whose husband had been lost in Afghanistan. She had 2 children and a quiet strength that shone through her tired eyes. Elena was petite, with dark hair always tied in a bun, her clothes simple but clean. She cooked meals for the volunteers in borrowed pots, her smile warm whenever Rex tumbled into her lap, begging for scraps. For Logan, the workdays blurred into a rhythm of sawdust, sweat, and barking. He hammered boards, scrubbed walls, and carried beams side by side with men and women who knew hardship. At night, he returned home exhausted, but as he watched the pup sleeping in a tangle at his feet, he felt the flicker of purpose. One evening, Clara Jennings stopped by, carrying a basket of cornbread. She had been watching the efforts from across town. "You've got half the town talking, Logan," she said, her voice proud. "But it's the good kind of talk. Folks see hope in those houses." Logan nodded, humbled. Clara glanced at the pups sprawled in the yard. "And those 3? Well, they might just be your best recruiters." The official handover of the first renovated home came a month later at the modest church hall near Bay Ridge's main street. It was a chilly evening, the smell of chowder and baked bread filling the air as volunteers gathered. Wooden tables were set up with simple meals, and Pastor Ruth, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a voice that carried, offered a short blessing. Logan stood in the back, hands in his pockets, preferring anonymity. He watched as a veteran family approached the front, handed the keys to their new home. The father, still limping from an old injury, clutched them tightly, his wife beside him with tears on her cheeks. Their little boy, no more than 7, spotted Luna lying quietly near the corner. He knelt, wrapping his small arms around her neck. The pup licked his tears away, and the boy sobbed into her fur, shoulders shaking with relief. Logan's throat tightened. He thought of Emily's words, of Ryan's sacrifice, of the cold night he had once carried his pups away from a slammed door. Now he saw doors opening. For others. for himself. He stood still, listening to the laughter and chatter rising around him. The echo of hammers and saws turned into the music of renewal. Max barked once, drawing the boy's laughter through tears. Rex nosed at a discarded roll of bread, earning more smiles. Logan breathed deeply, the warmth of the room pressing against the ache that still lingered. He knew then that he had chosen the right path. Paws of Hope was no longer just an idea. It was alive. The early summer wind carried the tang of salt water and the faint cries of gulls as Logan walked the pups along Bay Ridge's narrow main street. Max trotted at his side, ears sharp and alert. Luna padded closer, brushing his leg with her flank for comfort. Rex bounded ahead with reckless enthusiasm, a stick clenched proudly between his teeth. Life had gained a steadier rhythm since Paws of Hope began its work, but Logan had learned long ago that peace rarely lingered without interruption. The interruption came on a Saturday afternoon. Logan had just returned home, setting a toolbox on the porch after repairing a loose gutter, when he noticed a sedan slowing at the curb. The car gleamed with a polish too deliberate, standing out in Bay Ridge's weather-worn streets. From it stepped Richard Davis, his father-in-law, tall but bent slightly with age. His hair, once coal-black, had gone almost entirely white, combed meticulously back from a stern face lined by years of pride and judgment. He wore a collared shirt tucked into slacks, the look of a man clinging to authority even as it slipped from his grasp. Beside him came Elaine Davis, Logan's mother-in-law. She was shorter than her husband, with carefully set curls and pearl earrings that gleamed despite the modest daylight. Her blue dress seemed chosen with precision, as if appearances still mattered above all else. Elaine's face bore a softness around the eyes that might have once passed for warmth, but Logan remembered it often hardened into criticism. She had been a woman shaped by social expectation, one who believed deeply in how neighbors talked about her family, and who often let that dictate her compassion. The pups reacted instantly. Max stiffened, barking sharp and low, a growl reverberating from his chest. Luna pressed closer to Logan, her dark eyes wide and cautious. Rex, usually reckless, placed himself squarely in front of Logan. Stick dropped at his feet, his little body taut with protective energy. Richard raised a hand as if to wave, but the movement was awkward, uncertain. "Logan," he said, his voice deep yet strained, "we thought it was time to see you, to see the dogs." Elaine followed quickly, her tone softer, honeyed, but laced with something rehearsed. "We miss our family, Logan. We want to make amends." Logan studied them silently, the leash wrapped firmly around his hand. He remembered the day he and the pups had been forced out of their home, Elaine's cold gaze, Richard's clipped order. The memory pressed like a bruise, but he kept his voice even. "This isn't the place to talk." Later that afternoon, they met at the Seaside Brew, a quiet cafe tucked near the church where Logan often bought Clara's favorite cinnamon scones. The interior was warm, with the scent of roasted beans, its walls lined with photos of Bay Ridge's fishing past. Logan chose a corner table, the pups lying obediently at his feet. Max watchful, Luna curled close, Rex fidgeting but alert. Richard and Elaine slid into the chairs across from him, their polished appearance clashing with the cafe's humble coziness. Elaine folded her hands, her rings glinting. "Logan, we've been reflecting. We acted harshly before. But families stumble, don't they? We cared for you, for the dogs, after Emily passed. Surely that means something." Logan's jaw tightened. He sipped his coffee, letting the silence stretch before answering. Richard leaned in, his tone clipped but measured. "The truth is, those months cost us a great deal. Food, space, patience. We think it's only fair that you contribute something now, a care fee, for the time we supported you and the animals. It's not unreasonable." The words hung heavy, mixing with the cafe's low hum. Logan glanced at the pups. Max let out a sharp bark, startling Richard enough to make him flinch. Luna pressed her nose against Logan's hand, grounding him, while Rex inched forward until his small body was between Logan's chair and the older couple. Their instincts were clear. Logan set his cup down carefully, his gaze steady. His voice was calm but unyielding, forged in the discipline of battlefields. "I will not let anyone turn these dogs, or Emily's memory, into bargaining chips. Not for money, not for leverage, not ever." Elaine's smile faltered, her hands tightening on her rings. Richard's face flushed, anger flickering behind his composure. The air between them thickened, the clink of cups and the hiss of the espresso machine sounding distant against the tension. Yet Logan did not raise his voice. His calm was its own weapon, a reminder that he had faced worse storms than this one. Max growled low, Rex barked once, and Luna pressed closer still. Logan let their presence anchor him. His eyes never left Richard and Elaine. "You showed me once what family means to you. I've built my own definition since then, and it doesn't involve fees." The silence that followed was absolute, thick enough to cut. Richard shifted in his chair. Elaine opened her mouth, but closed it again, their polished facades cracking beneath the weight of Logan's quiet certainty. For the first time, they looked less like arbiters of authority and more like strangers adrift. The autumn air in Bay Ridge carried a different bite now, crisp and sharp, heavy with the scent of salt and decaying leaves along the shoreline. The tourist season had ended, leaving the streets quieter, the shops more subdued. Logan Hayes walked along Main Street with the pups, Max trotting steadily at his left, Luna moving cautiously just behind him, and Rex darting forward with a stick so large it scraped the pavement. Life had settled into its steady rhythm. Days spent at the office of Paws of Hope, evenings working with volunteers, and nights at the cabin by the sea. For the first time in years, he had found a kind of peace, however fragile. That peace began to waver one cool Wednesday morning. Clara Jennings, his neighbor and steadfast supporter, stopped by the Paws of Hope office with a paper bag of blueberry muffins. Clara was a tall, lean woman in her late 40s, her long auburn hair tied back loosely, strands always escaping no matter how carefully she pinned them. She had grown up in Bay Ridge, the daughter of a fisherman who'd been lost at sea during a storm when she was 12. That loss had made her fiercely protective of others, often speaking blunt truths, but with a warmth that made people listen. She set the muffins on Logan's desk and looked at him with that mixture of concern and practicality she often carried. "Logan, I don't know how to say this gently. It's about Richard and Elaine." Logan's jaw tensed even before she finished. Clara folded her arms. "They've lost everything. The shop closed weeks ago. Bad loans, bad timing. The bank's repossessing their house next month. Word is they're staying in a rented room at the edge of town, but it won't last. Folks are whispering. Some think it's justice. Some think it's tragedy." Max let out a sharp bark, as if sensing the tension rising in his master. Luna pushed her head against Logan's hand, grounding him, while Rex hopped up and put his front paws on the desk, scattering papers. Logan steadied himself, staring at the muffin bag as though it held answers. He muttered quietly, almost to himself, "After what they did, should I even care?" That night at the community center where Paws of Hope hosted weekly gatherings, Logan watched volunteers and families share food and laughter. Among them was Sophie Callahan, an 8-year-old girl with bright blonde pigtails and freckled cheeks. She was the daughter of a Marine who had been wounded overseas. Sophie had a way of saying things without filter, her innocence unclouded by the complications of adults. She was drawing with crayons on a scrap of paper when she looked up at Logan. "Mr. Logan," she chirped, "Clara says some people don't have houses anymore. If your dogs didn't have a house, you'd let them stay with you, right?" Logan knelt beside her, brushing his calloused hand gently over her drawing of a house with a crooked chimney. "Of course, Sophie. They're family." She tilted her head, frowning thoughtfully. "Then, if your wife's mommy and daddy don't have a house, will you let them stay with you and the puppies?" The question pierced deeper than any reprimand. Logan felt the air tighten in his chest. Sophie's voice was innocent, unburdened by betrayal or pride. Her words carried him back to Emily, her laughter, her patience, and her final whispered request in those hospital nights. "Logan, promise me, no matter what happens, don't let the bitterness kill your kindness." Logan sat still long after Sophie ran off to play with Rex, who had stolen one of her crayons and was prancing with it like treasure. He watched Luna curl up by the children's feet, Max standing sentinel at the doorway. He felt the old ache of choice, justice or mercy. 2 days later, Logan asked Clara to arrange a meeting. They met Richard and Elaine at the same seaside cafe where their last conversation had turned into tension. But now Richard looked older, his shoulders bent, his once proud face drawn with exhaustion. His clothes were neat but worn, a jacket fraying at the cuffs. Elaine wore no pearls this time, only a plain cardigan, her hair pulled back without its usual careful set. They looked smaller somehow, as though pride itself had been stripped away. Elaine spoke first, her voice carrying a tremor. "We have nowhere left to go, Logan. We made mistakes. Too many of them." She glanced down at her hands, bare of the rings she once wore. "We don't expect your forgiveness, but we don't know where else to turn." Richard's jaw was tight, his eyes bloodshot. He said nothing at first, then finally muttered, "We were wrong before, but you can't understand what it feels like to lose everything." Logan leaned forward, his voice quiet but steady. "I do understand. I lost Emily. I lost my home. I lost myself for a time. But I rebuilt piece by piece, not because anyone bailed me out, but because I learned to lean on what mattered." He let the silence hang, then added, "I will help you. I'll pay your debts, make sure you have a roof, but there will be conditions." Elaine's eyes widened with a flicker of hope, but Logan didn't soften his gaze. "You will work at Paws of Hope, full-time, as volunteers. You'll cook meals, repair houses, clean floors, no privileges, no titles. You'll work beside the very people you once dismissed. That's the only way." Richard's face flushed with indignation, his pride flaring. "You expect me to hammer nails and sweep floors like a—" He stopped when Max growled low under the table, the sound like distant thunder. Logan didn't flinch. "Yes," Logan said simply. "Like decent people, like veterans who lost everything and still got back up. You want a second chance? Earn it." The cafe grew quiet, only the hiss of the espresso machine breaking the silence. Elaine's eyes brimmed, her hand trembling as she clutched Richard's sleeve. For the first time, she looked less like the woman who once ordered Logan out of her house, and more like a widow's daughter who had lost her bearings. Richard stared at Logan, then at the pups beneath the table. Max, unblinking, Luna pressing against Logan, Rex chewing his stick carelessly, untroubled by adult pride. Logan slid a plain envelope across the table, the outlines of legal papers inside. "Sign these when you're ready. The debts will be cleared. The apartment is waiting, but only if you agree to the terms." Richard's hand hovered but did not take the envelope. Elaine whispered softly, "Thank you, Logan." He stood, calling Max, Luna, and Rex to heel. His voice was calm, resolved. "This isn't charity. It's a lesson. Don't waste it." Then he walked out into the cool Bay Ridge air, the gulls crying overhead, his 3 dogs trotting loyally at his side. The first weeks of Richard and Elaine's new life as volunteers at Paws of Hope were anything but graceful. The community center's workshop, once alive with the rhythm of hammers and the buzz of saws, rang with Richard's curses when he mismeasured a board or bent a nail. His tall frame hunched awkwardly over the workbench, his once pristine clothes now dusted with sawdust and sweat. Years of running a shop had not prepared him for manual labor, and his pride, once worn like armor, seemed to chafe with every mistake. In the kitchen, Elaine fared little better. She had never been much of a cook. Emily had inherited her culinary warmth from Richard's mother, not Elaine. The first pot of soup she attempted for the volunteers was too salty, her muffins collapsed in the oven, and she burned her hand once when forgetting to use an oven mitt. She tried to hide her embarrassment behind a fragile smile, but the volunteers, veterans who had endured far worse, offered gentle encouragement instead of judgment. The pups played their own quiet roles in this transformation. Max, steady and serious, took to shadowing Richard. Whenever Richard grew frustrated and dropped his hammer with a groan, Max would sit nearby, head tilted, amber eyes fixed on him, as if saying, "Try again." Richard would mutter, "What are you staring at?" before bending down to pick up the hammer again. Slowly the growls of irritation became sighs, then reluctant chuckles when Max barked approval at a board finally nailed straight. Luna, with her calm eyes and soft manner, began trailing Elaine in the kitchen. When Elaine trembled over another failed loaf, Luna pressed her nose into her hand, steadying her. The warmth of the pup's gentle insistence soothed something long buried in Elaine, the part of her that had once held Emily as a child, before years of pride hardened her edges. She found herself speaking softly to Luna, whispering doubts, only to be answered with a reassuring lick or a steady gaze that reminded her not everything had been lost. Rex, as ever, provided chaos. When Richard and Elaine grew too tense, he would drop a rubber ball or squeaky toy at their feet, demanding attention, Once, when Richard muttered angrily and shoved his stool back, Rex rolled the ball directly into his lap. Startled, Richard laughed for the first time in days, the sound rusty, almost foreign. Elaine looked up from her failed pie crust and found herself laughing too. Gradually they began to change. Richard's hands, once soft from years of ledger books, hardened with calluses. He grew adept at simple carpentry, his pride now rooted in usefulness rather than appearances. Elaine's soups improved, then her breads, until volunteers asked her to bake extra loaves to take home. The community, once skeptical of their motives, began to soften. One evening, while repainting the walls of a nearly finished home, Richard overheard Caleb Turner, the retired Navy mechanic, telling a young volunteer about his struggle with alcoholism after returning from deployment. Caleb's voice carried no shame, only the raw honesty of survival. Richard stood frozen, paintbrush in hand, his own failings echoing in his chest. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that weakness did not diminish a man, denying it did. That night, he sat on the porch beside Logan, Max at his feet. He said nothing, but the silence between them was no longer hostile. It was the silence of men who had both carried burdens too heavy to name. Elaine's turning point came one afternoon when Sophie Callahan, the little girl with freckles and boundless innocence, wandered into the kitchen while Elaine kneaded dough. Sophie watched silently before asking, "Did you used to make bread for Miss Emily?" The question pierced Elaine like a knife, for she hadn't. She had left Emily to learn such warmth on her own. Her eyes filled as she shook her head. Luna pressed against her leg, and Sophie smiled. "Well, you can make it for us now." Elaine's tears fell quietly into the dough, and for the first time, she felt she was giving instead of guarding. Weeks passed, and the day of another house dedication ceremony arrived. The community gathered in the church hall, tables laden with casseroles and pies, children darting between benches. Pastor Ruth, tall and commanding, spoke warmly of gratitude and resilience. Logan stood at the back as always, arms crossed, the pup circling his legs. He watched Richard and Elaine move among the volunteers. Richard carrying chairs without complaint, Elaine arranging loaves of bread she had baked herself. When the time came to present the keys to the new veteran family, Richard surprised everyone by stepping forward. His hands shook slightly as he took the microphone. "I spent too long believing pride made me strong," he began, his voice gravelly, "but it made me cruel. I turned my back on my own family, on my son-in-law, when he needed me most. Today I've learned more from these men and women, these dogs even, than I ever thought possible. And I want to say this plainly in front of all of you. Logan, I was wrong. Elaine and I were wrong. We're sorry." The hall fell silent, the words carrying more weight than the rafters could bear. Elaine stepped beside him, her face wet with tears. She didn't speak, only nodded, her hands clasped tightly together. Logan stood frozen for a moment. Max barked once, sharp and decisive. Luna padded forward to nuzzle Elaine's skirt. Rex bounded up onto the stage, squeaky toy in his mouth, and the hall erupted in laughter. The tension broke, replaced by applause, cheers, and the clatter of children's hands pounding the benches. Logan's eyes softened as he stepped forward at last. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't need to. He simply extended his hand to Richard, and when Richard took it, the room roared with approval. Logan turned, smiling faintly, his gaze drifting upward as though Emily might be somewhere in the rafters, watching. The pups ran loose across the hall, children chasing them in delight. Amid the chaos, Logan knew. Family, fractured though it had been, was not beyond repair. Forgiveness, slow and painful, had found its way home. That night, Logan returned to his cabin by the sea. The pups collapsed in a heap by the fire, their tails twitching in sleep. Outside, the waves rolled steady against the shore, as constant as the heartbeat of Bay Ridge. Paws of hope continued to grow, not loudly, but with the quiet persistence of kindness. And within its work, within the laughter and labor of volunteers, Emily's words lived on. Turn the hurt into something good. In the end, Logan's journey with Max, Luna, and Rex reminds us that miracles do not always arrive with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come quietly, through the wag of a dog's tail, the touch of forgiveness, or the courage to turn pain into love. It was not only $7 million that changed a life, but the grace of God working through human hearts, guiding them from bitterness toward mercy. In our everyday lives, we may not inherit great fortunes or build entire foundations, but each of us can choose kindness in the small moments. We can forgive when it feels impossible, offer a hand when it feels inconvenient, and trust that even the smallest acts of love are part of a larger miracle that God is writing through us. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect. Share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and if you believe in the power of redemption and love, write Amen below as a prayer for every family who is still waiting for healing. Subscribe to stay with us on more journeys of faith, love, and the unexpected ways God blesses us through His creation. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He watch over your home and your family, just as He watched over Logan and his 3 faithful dogs.